Hey guys, I just want to do a quick video about how to get past doing T&M. Most of you will know that T&M is just short for time and material, and there's a lot of other small abbreviations like that that you'll find in business, and you'll learn those over time. And I will always try to explain them as I go. But getting down to it, there's a very common myth that when a customer, from the customer standpoint anyway, that when a customer hands you $1,000 check, you just made $1,000, and that is so far from the truth. Uh, it's just unbelievable that anybody would ever think that in this day and age, and as educated as people think they are about running a business, they'll tell you, trust me, they can run your business better than you can. So, how to profit in home improvements, how to get past T&M. T&M is essentially when you're charging hourly and you're charging materials. It also covers if you are charging a flat fee for your time. Mostly it's hourly or hourly based, even if it's not strictly hourly. So if you want to get past that, what you need to do is you need to figure out and learn what your materials cost and what your labor costs, and that's why a lot of people start out with T&M, and it's not a bad idea to start out with T&M. It's perfectly reasonable. Most everybody who works in the home improvement field will do that if they're working, they're on their own, starting a small handyman business or something like that, unless you're working hourly for a boss or whatever like that, then you might not be. But what we need to do to get past that is we need to break down our estimates or quotes or however it is that you prefer to do business. You need to break it down into four essential categories. You need to break it down into material, labor, O&P, which is overhead and profit, and a buffer. So this is the very basic, the very starting point. And once you do this, you can adjust these numbers based on what you're doing, based on what works for you, based on how much you're trying to make. You're going to make adjustments to these numbers, but this is the basic starting point. So you want 30% of your quote should be materials, 30% should be labor, 30% should be O&P, and 10% should be a buffer. Now, what I normally do with that 10% is that is the deposit up front that I take on almost all of my jobs. Most of my jobs, I take a 10% deposit up front, unless it gets booked out in the next couple of days. I'm not going to make them write 3 checks for a small job. So there are exceptions to that, but I do a lot of remodeling, larger remodeling. So, I'm for that 10%, they're basically paying me to block out a month of my time for their job, and if they bail on me, then it's going to take me a little bit to recover from that. But that 10% deposit, once it is no longer covering the what if they bail on me, now it's covering the where else it needs to go. It might go to gas, it might go here, there, whatever. It's just a little bit of grace for whatever you need it for. So the first thing that we really need to talk about, though, is materials. And materials is a whole nother discussion, a whole nother video. It's a lot of research. It depends on a lot of what exactly you're doing and what you specialize in. And as you learn to specialize, you will learn what your material costs are, and you'll learn how to deal with material. But the important thing that we need to know is that the 30% material line does not cover special order or extra expensive materials. So if you're dealing with a tile job, per se, the 30% should be your base materials, your mortar, maybe even your grout. Those are the materials that you go to the supply house to buy that are not special order. That 30% in most cases, should not cover the tile itself, the finished material. And the reason for that is tile can be anywhere from 30 cents a square foot to $300+ a square foot. I've installed tiles that were worth more than some employed people make in a week. They get crazy. So that line, any special order, as a general rule, any special order material should not go in your budget in this framework. That's extra. You could deal with that how you like. You can just make the customer pay for it so that it's not on your books. That's what we like to do in New York. For smaller companies like this, that way we don't have to pay for it with our insurance. The insurance looks at how much money you deal with, and that's how they charge you. So if I never touch that money, say let's use countertops for example. When I do kitchens, I don't do countertops. There are a plethora of countertop companies that would love to come in for 2 hours, install the countertops, and they'll deal with all that. I never touch it. I tell the customer where to go. I tell them who to use. I have 2 different companies that I highly recommend in the area, and I push very hard for my customer. Unless they already have somebody else in mind, I push very hard for my customer to use one of those 2 companies. And those companies know who I am. I know who they are. We work well together. We're on the same page, so everything goes well. But I never touch that money, and that keeps it off of my books, essentially. If you want to make money on that, then you're going to have to go through the rigmarole of having the customer go talk to them, having the customer deal with ordering and everything, and then the house can't give them a price, so they're going to use brackets. If they're experienced, they're going to use ABC brackets as price ranges, and they're going to want to talk to you, or if you have it prearranged with them, that maybe they'll just tack 10% on or something like that, where they can actually give the customer a price. But it becomes a vicious circle of trying to arrange everything. And to me, it's not worth the $100 or the $300 that I might make on markup to go through 3 days of back and forth with 3 different people. So it's just not really worth it for me to do that on things like special order materials. Now, if I have to order special order materials, like there's one I use a lot, which is the Onyx surround system. That's something that I have to order through my supplier. The customer goes online, picks out the color, tells me the color, and then I have to order it because there's a lot of dimensions involved, and I have to make sure that it's done correctly. So that gets that markup. That's something that I have to do. But if there's something that I don't have to touch, and something that the customer can get way less expensive, like a granite countertop, by having it at house, just paying the house to do it, then you're better off doing it. But where I'm going with all that is not part of your material line in this structure, okay? So this is really, really, really simple, and I spent more time talking about the details of material than I will about how to structure this. Materials, 30%. Labor, 30%. O&P, 30%. Your buffer, 10%. That's all there is to it. It's that simple. Now you're no longer T&M. Figure out what your base materials are. Figure out what your labor is. Figure out what your O&P is. Now you'll notice that O&P and labor, if you're working by yourself, are actually the same line. But you need to split those, because when you start to subcontract or partner with other companies, if you don't separate that, then it's going to become a line of confusion. If I go do a tile job, then the materials are 30% and my labor / profit is 60% if I'm doing it. That's how it looks from certain perspectives. But the reality is that my labor still costs me money, and overhead and profit is different line. And then always have that 10% buffer in there. At the end of the job, you can stick that into your O&P. If you run short on materials, you can stick that into materials. If you run into problems that you didn't expect, but not big enough problems that you want to do a change order, if you do a quote system or whatever like that, then that can cover small changes, and it will make the customer happy that you didn't make them sign a change order for $100 on a $20,000 job. You know, so that 10% is really a good rule to give yourself some room. And once you figure out each of these lines, don't micromanage them. Just keep everything inside those numbers, and then everything left over becomes profit. So if you don't use 30% materials, then that becomes profit. If you don't use your 30% labor, that becomes profit. If you don't use your 10% buffer, that becomes profit. So at the end of the day, now you're making more money because you're using a basic structure to run your systems. And it's really that easy. It's not much to it. You just got off a T&M. Now you're not an hourly employee anymore. Now you know exactly where that check is going. Now you know that if your quote is $1,000, that you have $300 in material, $300 in labor, $300 in O&P, and $100 in extra money for whatever you need. Maybe put it in your gas tank. Maybe take your SO out for dinner or something. Whatever it is, that's the basic way to structure your business estimates and quotes so that you can make money instead of being paid by the hour like an employee.